Maupay nga kulop. Good afternoon. I'm Voltaire Oyzon, and today we will explore Pagtigaman, the warning in the word. We will trace the etymology of the place named Dulag in Leyte, not just as a linguistic exercise, but as a critical strategy for disaster risk mitigation. We all live somewhere, right? And we have names for the place where we live in, right? But I think, most especially the younger ones, I don't know if they know what's the meaning of their place names, di ba? For example, like kanina we're talking about with Ilyo Mandawi because Ma'am kanina was talking about Mansaka, and I asked, is the man in Mansaka related to the man in Mandawi? Something like that. Okay. So we will try to ask the question like, what's the origin of the place name of Dulag? And then we will accomplish this by asking two tangential questions like, was the Supertyphoon Yolanda unprecedented? And does the Waray language have a word for storm surge? As we look at the records juxtaposed with the turbulent Pacific, we begin to see that our geography is a social space where culture and environment clash. These chronicles aren't just artifacts. They are records of how we are perceived of how we have perceived our hazardous landscape over centuries. My presentation will follow 7 key stages, like we look at the catalyst of Supertyphoon Yolanda and the recurring history of catastrophe in the region, the fatal gap between the modern jargon and the inherited vocabulary, and then finally, the deconstruction of the name Dulag itself to reveal as an early warning system. When Supertyphoon Yolanda struck in 2013, many called the 15 to 20 foot wave or storm surge unprecedented. However, historical records tell a different story. The earliest record of, sorry, nahuhuli. Ito pala yung yung recording ng storm surge. I think, oo. Ma'am Hope was there. Sorry. Oh, and it was described in for example, in Kulin and even in Alsina, right? So to say that it was unprecedented, I think is a blunder. Okay. So ganito yung ka-violent. No? And it was described by Alsina's waves are like great vaults, coming many times higher than the ship, hurling ships into the forest. Can you imagine? And this is in 1668, right? So, notice the similarities between the destruction of the Hernani town in 1897 and the Tanawan town in 2013. So, to say that this is unprecedented, I think that's not true. Okay. This is the Santo Niño Church in Tacloban, wrecked in 1897 and again in 2013. History is repeating itself because we have failed to tigaman or to mark the signs. This is the Giwan Church, October 12, 1897 and November 13, 2013. So, in other words, storms such as this is not, it's like part of the community's existence. No? So at that time, I was wondering if Supertyphoon Yolanda was truly a historical anomaly. A timeline of recurring Pacific catastrophe from 1589 in Manila flood to the 1521 Leyte typhoon proves that these events are characteristics of the region. In 2013, the weather agency Pag-asa used the term storm surge. To the grassroots communities, this is an alien jargon, and the urgency to evacuate was lost. The term storm surge failed to convey urgency to grassroots communities in 2013. Yet the Waray language has always had an exact term, dulak. Dulak is a big wave that burst with fury on the coast, according to Alsina in 1668. And the word dulok, I think, is a cognate of Tagalog tulak, to push, or to flatten. Why is the town named Dulag? According to James Gibson, Theory of Affordances, we name a place based on what it can provide. It could be for good or for ill. Okay? So, like, tawagon natin siyang kawayanan, kay daghang kawayan, di ba? Oo. Like, ang Pasil, for example, in Cebu, di ba? Because you have sandbars. Oo. And it is related to the Tagalog Pasig. Okay? We define, in other words, we name a place based on what is abundant in that place. So, my theory is that Dulag was named after that recurring event, Dulok. But here's the thing. Because of colonization, and probably, we forgot about it, and people thought that Dulag comes from dulao, turmeric, or dalag. But if we're going to examine it based on the criteria of Austronesian root, the historical dictionary attestation, and the theory of affordances, they all fail. Okay? And I theorize that it comes from Dulac. Now, you may ask the question, how are you now going to explain the K to the G, right? The Spanish chronicler, they have a hard time in differentiating the velar g with the k, right? So, that's why, for example, before I go there, because it's from Dulac and it's become Dulac, okay? In Waray, I don't know if it's also true in Cebuano, that when we shift the prominence of a word, it shifts its category. For example, kawayan, bamboo, it becomes kawayan as a place, right? And kalubian, kalubian, it becomes kalubian, right? And kalanggaman, kalanggaman. So that explains why from Dulac, it becomes Dulac, right? As a place name. Now, to explain the shift, I think the Spanish, they have the hard time of differentiating the two. In fact, for example, the word bahag, they would sometimes record it as bahak, right? Even the word salog, for example, they would record it as salo without the G. Or linog, they would write it as linok, right? And So for the Spanish chroniclers or the Western chroniclers, they think that those sounds are just the same. So I think that explains why it becomes dulak in other records. Okay? For example, another example, that abuyog would be recorded as abuyo. And even in Tagig, tagagiik becomes tagig. Okay? Lubok, I saw lobok is recorded as lubog. Okay? And dulak becomes dulag. Right? So, the obsolete orthography of the Spaniards has led to the mispronunciation of place names. Okay? That's why I argue that the archival records, like the 1622 confirmation, the encomienda, explicitly spelled the town Dulac. We find the paper trail in the 1622 confirmation, the encomienda, where the town, the spelling as Dulac with Q-U-E. This archives the original K sound, proving that Dulag was always meant to be a marker of the land's tendency to be flattened by the sea. This is the heart of the tragedy. The death toll in 2013 wasn't just a failure of meteorology, it was a failure of cultural memory, relying on alien jargon of storm surge and forgetting that Dulag literally means to flatten the place. The population lost their most vital early warning system. So, in other words, the Supertyphoon Yolanda was not unprecedented, and we have a word for that, no, for the storm surge. For example, these are other place names that can serve as warning system or markers. For example, in Tacloban, we have the place name Panalaron, from the root word salad, the bottom of the river or sea. So you would expect flooding on that area, right? Because it is now a community. There's a church, there's a school, all right? And then we have Parik, for example, in Samar. It means landslide. And we changed these names, okay, into like names of saints, something like that. And we have, in Biliran, we have Bilwang, which means flash flood. So if we remember, and we know these words, we would not build communities in these places, okay? And Anas, to erode, no? And so on. I don't know in Cebu what are the place names, no? But I'm into place names, so I'm starting from in the Eastern Visayas. So we must integrate geographically rooted history into modern disaster risk mitigation. We must view our place names as tigaman, okay? Markers of constant risk. Because to speak the true name of the land is the first step in surviving it. So it's like remembering is a disaster risk mitigation. Thank you.